Rain had been falling over the city since late afternoon, turning the streets silver beneath the traffic lights and making every windshield look like a moving mirror. Outside the gates of Westbridge Academy, one of the most expensive private schools in the state, parents sat inside warm luxury cars, impatiently waiting for their children to be escorted out by staff members holding black umbrellas. The line of vehicles barely moved. Horns sounded. Drivers complained. Security guards tried to keep order. And in the middle of all that noise, nobody noticed the little girl in the red coat until it was almost too late. She was small, no more than 7 years old, with a pink backpack hanging from one shoulder and one hand stretched toward the ground where her lunchbox had slipped from her fingers. It rolled off the curb, bounced once, and landed in the street. The girl looked left, then right, but the rain blurred everything. She stepped forward quickly, thinking she had time. But from behind a turning delivery truck, a black SUV came speeding through the lane, its headlights cutting through the rain, its tires hissing against the wet road. For one frozen second, everyone saw what was about to happen. But nobody moved, except one man. Marcus Reed had been walking on the opposite side of the street, holding his daughter Amara's hand tightly beneath a faded blue umbrella that had one broken spoke. He had just picked her up from the public elementary school 3 blocks away. His work boots were soaked. His jacket was old. His shoulders were tired from another long shift at the repair garage. But the moment he saw that little girl in the red coat step into danger, something inside him reacted before fear could reach him. He dropped the umbrella. He let go of Amara's hand and shouted, "Stay there." Then he ran. The SUV was close enough that the driver finally slammed on the horn. The little girl turned toward the sound and froze, her eyes wide with terror. Marcus reached her just as the vehicle skidded across the wet asphalt. He wrapped both arms around her and pushed off the pavement with everything he had. They fell hard onto the curb, rolling into a puddle as the SUV missed them by inches. The sound of screeching brakes tore through the street. Someone screamed. Someone else dropped their phone. And then silence fell so suddenly it felt like the whole city had stopped breathing. Marcus lay on his side, his right hand scraped open, his shoulder aching from the impact. The little girl trembled against him, crying into his jacket. He sat up slowly, ignoring the pain, and looked into her face. "You're okay," he said softly. "You're safe now." She nodded, but her small fingers clung to him like she was afraid the world might try to take her again. Amara ran to him crying, her little braids bouncing against her cheeks. "Daddy," she shouted. Marcus reached for her with his injured hand, wincing but trying to hide it. "I'm okay, baby," he whispered. "I'm okay." But Amara had seen the SUV. She had seen how close it came. She had seen her father almost disappear in front of her, and the fear in her eyes made Marcus's chest tighten more than the pain in his shoulder ever could. Then the school gates opened wider, and a woman came running through the rain without an umbrella, her heels splashing through puddles, her expensive coat hanging open. Her name was Victoria Sinclair, and nearly everyone in the city knew it. She owned Sinclair Capital, lived behind iron gates on the north side, and appeared on business magazine covers with headlines calling her brilliant, ruthless, and untouchable. She was the kind of woman people lowered their voices around. The kind of woman who made million-dollar decisions before breakfast. But in that moment, she was not a millionaire. She was not a CEO. She was only a mother, terrified that she had almost lost her child. "Lily," Victoria cried, dropping to her knees beside the little girl. Lily let go of Marcus and threw herself into her mother's arms. Victoria held her so tightly that her hands shook. "Are you hurt? Baby, look at me. Are you hurt?" Lily shook her head, sobbing. "He saved me, Mommy," she said, pointing at Marcus. "He pushed me away." Victoria looked at Marcus then, really looked at him. His clothes were worn. His boots were muddy. Rain ran down the side of his face. Blood dripped from his scraped palm onto the cuff of his jacket. Beside him stood Amara, a small girl with frightened eyes, clutching the broken umbrella. Victoria had expected to see a security guard, maybe one of the school staff, maybe someone trained for emergencies. Instead, she saw a tired black father who looked like he had already carried too much in life and still found the strength to save a stranger's child. "Thank you," Victoria said, her voice breaking. "Thank you. I don't know how to." She stopped, reaching into her purse with trembling fingers. "Please, let me give you something. Money, a doctor, anything you need." Marcus stood slowly, keeping one hand on Amara's shoulder. His face changed the moment Victoria reached for her purse. Something guarded came into his eyes, something cold and old, like a door being locked from the inside. "No," he said. Victoria blinked. "Please. You saved my daughter. I didn't do it for money. I understand that, but at least let me help with your hand." Marcus looked down at his bleeding palm, then back at Lily, who was still crying against her mother. His expression softened for only a second. "Just keep your daughter close," he said quietly. "That's payment enough." Then he took Amara's hand and turned away. Victoria watched him walk down the sidewalk through the rain. Something about him unsettled her. Not because he was rude. Not because he refused the money. It was the way he looked at her when he heard her name. Like he already knew her. Like the name Sinclair had once cost him something. Before the story continues, like this video, subscribe to the channel, and comment your city below. Where are you watching from today? That night, long after Lily had been checked by a private doctor and put to bed, Victoria sat alone in her study with a glass of untouched wine beside her laptop. The rain had stopped, but water still slid down the tall windows of the mansion like tears. She should have been relieved. Her daughter was alive. Nothing else should have mattered. But she could not stop thinking about Marcus Reed. Her assistant had found his name from a witness who recognized him. Marcus Reed, age 36, single father, mechanic at Carter's Auto Repair. No criminal record, no social media, no listed relatives except one daughter, Amara Reed. On paper, he looked ordinary, almost invisible. But Victoria had built an empire by noticing what other people missed. And Marcus Reed did not feel ordinary. She typed his name into an old news archive database her company used for background checks. At first, nothing important appeared. A few public records, an address change, an expired engineering association listing. Victoria paused. Engineering? She leaned closer and searched again, adding the word Sinclair. This time, the screen changed. An article from 12 years earlier appeared near the bottom of the page. The photo attached to it was grainy, but the face was unmistakable. Younger, cleaner-shaven, wearing a white hard hat, standing outside a construction site with police tape behind him. Marcus Reed. Victoria's fingers went still. The headline read, "Young engineer blamed after Sinclair Tower collapse." A chill moved through her. Sinclair Tower, her father's project. The disaster her family never spoke about. The tragedy buried under settlements, legal statements, and carefully managed silence. Victoria opened the article. It said Marcus Reed had been a rising structural engineer before the collapse. It said he had approved materials that later failed. It said several workers were injured. It said one woman died on site. His wife, Naomi Reed. Victoria read that sentence twice. His wife had died in the collapse, and somehow the report had blamed him. She sat back slowly, the room suddenly feeling too quiet. Earlier that day, Marcus had risked his life to save her daughter. But 12 years ago, according to the official story, he had been responsible for a disaster connected to her family. Something did not make sense. A man who refused reward money, who held his daughter like she was his whole reason for breathing, who looked at Victoria Sinclair like her name was a wound. That man did not feel like the careless villain described in those old reports. Victoria scrolled lower and found a photograph from the investigation. Behind Marcus, partially hidden near the edge of the frame, stood her late father, Charles Sinclair, speaking to a man she still knew well, Richard Vale, her company's senior executive and her father's closest friend. Victoria's stomach tightened. She closed the laptop, but the headline remained in her mind. Marcus Reed had saved Lily's life. And now Victoria was beginning to realize that years ago, her family may have destroyed his. The next morning, Marcus woke before the alarm. He always did. Years of early shifts, unpaid bills, and fatherhood had trained his body to rise before the world asked anything from him. For a few seconds, he lay still in the dark, listening to the quiet hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen and the soft breathing of his daughter in the next room. His right shoulder ached every time he moved. His palm burned beneath the bandage he had wrapped around it himself. But pain was familiar to Marcus. He knew how to work through it. He knew how to smile over it. He knew how to keep moving, because stopping was a luxury life had never given him. He sat up slowly and looked across the room at the old wooden box beneath his dresser. It was half hidden behind a pair of work boots, but he always knew it was there. Some men kept memories in photo albums. Marcus kept his in a locked box because memories, if left open, could swallow a man whole. Inside were the things he could not throw away and could not bear to look at. A wedding ring, folded blueprints, a cracked voice recorder, and a photograph of Naomi smiling in the sunlight with one hand resting on her pregnant belly. Amara had her mother's eyes. That was the blessing and the punishment. Every morning, Marcus saw the woman he lost in the face of the child he lived for. He stood, dressed quietly, and went to the kitchen. The apartment was small, but Marcus kept it clean. The table had scratches across it. One chair leaned slightly to the left. The window above the sink looked out toward the brick wall of the next building. It was not much, but it was safe, and safe was all Marcus had ever promised his daughter. He made oatmeal with brown sugar, because Amara liked it sweet, packed her lunch in a purple lunchbox, and placed 2 slices of apple on the side, because she said they looked like smiles. When Amara walked in rubbing her eyes, Marcus turned with a grin that hid every ache in his body. Morning, sunshine. She did not smile back right away. She walked straight to him and hugged his waist. "I dreamed about the car," she whispered. Marcus closed his eyes for a moment, then placed his good hand on the back of her head. "It was just a dream. It almost hit you, but it didn't. It could have." Marcus knelt carefully, so they were face to face. "Baby, listen to me. I'm right here. Nothing happened." Her eyes dropped to his bandaged hand. Something happened. He followed her gaze, then gently curled his fingers. "Just a scratch. You always say that." Marcus wanted to laugh, but the sadness in her voice stopped him. Children of struggle grow older in quiet ways. They learn when money is low. They learn when adults are pretending not to be scared. They learn the difference between a real smile and one built for protection. Amara was only 6, but she had already learned too much. He touched her cheek. "I need you to know something. Yesterday, I ran because that little girl needed help. If it had been you in the street, I would pray somebody would do the same." Amara nodded, but her eyes stayed worried. Her mommy was rich. Marcus's expression tightened before he could stop it. "How do you know that?" She had a big car and shiny shoes, and people kept looking at her like she was famous. Marcus stood and turned back to the counter. "Some people have more than others. Is that bad?" "No," he said after a moment. "Having money isn't bad. Forgetting people are people that's bad." Amara thought about that while climbing into her chair. Marcus placed breakfast in front of her, then poured coffee into a chipped mug. He had not eaten yet. He would tell himself he was not hungry until lunch, and then at lunch he would tell himself dinner was close enough. That was how he stretched a paycheck without letting his daughter notice. But Amara noticed more than he knew. She pushed her bowl slightly toward him. "You can have some." Marcus smiled. "I made that for you." "I know. But superheroes need breakfast." The word hit him softly in the chest. Yesterday, when they got home, Amara had drawn a picture of him with a red cape, standing in front of a car. She had taped it to the fridge while he cleaned the blood from his palm. Marcus had stared at that drawing for a long time after she went to sleep. He did not feel like a superhero. He felt like a man who had spent 12 years trying not to drown. Across town, Victoria Sinclair had not slept at all. Morning light poured through the tall windows of her bedroom, touching silk curtains, polished floors, and furniture chosen by designers whose names she barely remembered. Everything around her looked perfect, expensive, controlled. Yet she sat at the edge of her bed, still wearing the clothes from the night before, her laptop open beside her. Old articles spread across the screen like ghosts. Sinclair Tower. She had been 21 when it happened. away at business school. Her father had called it a terrible accident, a construction failure, a legal nightmare. He told her the company had handled it, that the responsible engineer had been exposed, that the families had been compensated, and that the best thing she could do was not read the tabloids. Victoria had believed him because daughters often mistake authority for truth when it comes from the voice that raised them. But now she was reading everything. The official report said Marcus signed off on steel supports from a cheaper supplier 3 days before the collapse. It said he ignored warnings from workers. It said his negligence created the conditions that killed his wife and injured 11 others. But the deeper Victoria looked, the more the story began to crack. The report was too clean, the timeline too convenient. Marcus had been blamed quickly, almost efficiently, as if someone had prepared the answer before the question had fully been asked. She opened another document from a legal archive. Most pages were sealed, but one summary caught her attention. Marcus Reed had refused to speak publicly after the case. No interviews, no lawsuit, no appeal that made it past the early stage. Then, within months, he vanished from engineering completely. Victoria leaned back, frowning. Why would a guilty man refuse to defend himself? Shame, maybe. But why would a man who lost his wife not fight for his own name? And why had her father, a man obsessed with reputation, settled so many claims so quickly and privately? Her phone buzzed. It was her assistant, Dana. "Ms. Sinclair, I found the man from yesterday. Marcus Reed. He works at Carter's Auto Repair on East Fulton. Shift starts at 8. Victoria looked at the old photograph on her screen, then at the window overlooking her private garden. Send a car. There was a pause. To bring him here? No, Victoria said. To take me there. Carter's Auto Repair sat between a laundromat and a pawn shop, its faded sign hanging over a garage bay that smelled of oil, rubber, and hot metal. Marcus was already under the hood of a sedan when the black luxury car pulled up outside. He heard it before he saw it. Cars like that did not belong on East Fulton unless someone was lost, collecting rent, or delivering trouble. When Victoria stepped out, the other mechanics stopped pretending not to stare. She looked different in daylight, but no less powerful. Her coat probably cost more than Marcus made in a month. Her hair was smooth, her posture straight, her expression controlled. She walked into the garage like she was used to doors opening before she touched them. Marcus wiped his hands on a rag and kept his voice low. You shouldn't be here. Victoria stopped a few feet from him. I wanted to check on your hand. My hand is fine. And your daughter? She's fine too. I'm glad. Marcus nodded once, hoping that would end it. But Victoria did not move. Her eyes searched his face with the same sharp focus he had seen in men across conference tables years ago. Men who smiled while deciding which lives were affordable losses. I looked you up, she said. The garage noise seemed to fade around him. Marcus's jaw tightened. Then you know enough to stay away. I know what the report said. You mean what your father's people said. Victoria absorbed that without flinching. I know you worked on Sinclair Tower. Marcus turned away and reached for a wrench. I don't talk about that. Maybe you should. He faced her then, and the anger in his eyes was not loud, but it was deep. You want a story, Miss Sinclair? Here it is. Your family built something with dirty hands, and when it fell, they needed someone small enough to crush. They chose me. End of story. Victoria's voice softened. Was the report false? Marcus laughed once, bitterly. You came all the way here to ask me that. I came because yesterday you saved my daughter, and last night I found out my family may have destroyed your life. So yes, I'm asking. For the first time, Marcus looked uncertain. Not weak, not afraid, but caught between the past he buried and the truth he had stopped believing anyone wanted. He glanced toward the front of the garage, where his co-workers watched from a distance. Then he stepped closer and lowered his voice. Truth doesn't mean much when the people with money own the room it's spoken in. Victoria held his gaze. Maybe not, but I own some rooms now. Marcus shook his head. That's exactly why I don't trust you. The words landed harder than Victoria expected. She had been feared, envied, obeyed, criticized. But not trusted? That was something she rarely considered. In her world, trust was a contract, a signature, a background check. To Marcus, trust was blood and loss, and a grave with his wife's name on it. She reached into her bag, not for money this time, but for a business card. Marcus did not take it. "If you ever decide to tell me what really happened," she said, placing it on the workbench, "call me." Marcus stared at the card like it was a trap. Victoria turned to leave, but his voice stopped her. "You want to help?" he said. "Forget my name. Forget you found me. Go back to your mansion and raise your daughter better than your father raised you." Victoria turned slowly. For a moment, pain flashed across her face, quick and private. Then she nodded. "I intend to," she said. After she left, Marcus stood motionless in the garage, the business card still lying beside his tools. He wanted to throw it away. He wanted to burn it. He wanted to pretend she had never come. But his eyes kept drifting back to the name printed in black letters. Victoria Sinclair, the daughter of the man who had ruined him. And maybe, somehow, the first Sinclair who wanted to know the truth. For the next 3 days, Marcus tried to convince himself that nothing had changed. He went to work. He picked up Amara from school. He cooked dinner, checked her homework, folded laundry, and smiled whenever she looked at him too closely. But something had changed. The past had found the address he had spent 12 years hiding behind, and now it stood outside his door wearing Victoria Sinclair's face. Every time his phone rang, his body tightened. Every time a car slowed near the apartment, he looked through the blinds. He hated that feeling most of all, not fear exactly, but preparation. The old instinct of a man who had once learned that disaster never knocks politely. Victoria's business card sat in the kitchen drawer beneath a roll of tape and a stack of unpaid bills. Marcus had thrown it away twice. Both times, he had taken it back out of the trash before Amara could see it. He told himself it was because he did not want her asking questions. But deep down he knew the truth. Part of him wanted to call, not because he trusted Victoria, but because she had said something no Sinclair had ever said to him before. She had asked what really happened. For 12 years, people had asked why he did it, how he could be so careless, how he slept at night. No one from that family had ever asked if the story was a lie. On the 4th morning, the first reporter showed up. Marcus saw her standing outside the garage with a cameraman before he even clocked in. She was young, polished, and smiling in that hungry way people smiled when someone else's pain might become their opportunity. "Mr. Reed," she called as soon as he stepped out of his truck. "Is it true you're the same Marcus Reed connected to the Sinclair Tower collapse?" He stopped walking. The mechanics inside turned their heads. A customer lowered his newspaper. The cameraman lifted the lens. Marcus said nothing. The reporter moved closer. "The public is calling you a hero after saving Lily Sinclair, but 12 years ago, investigators said your negligence caused a fatal accident. Do you believe you deserve forgiveness?" Forgiveness. The word struck him with such force that his injured hand curled into a fist. Forgiveness was what guilty men asked for. Forgiveness was what people offered when they wanted to stand above you. Marcus did not need forgiveness for trying to stop a disaster that richer men had created. But he could not say that. Not there. Not with cameras watching and memories pressing against his throat. He walked past her. "Mr. Reed, did you save Lily Sinclair because you felt guilty about what happened to your wife?" That stopped him. The garage became silent. Marcus turned slowly, and for 1 second the anger in him was visible enough that the reporter stepped back. "Do not say my wife's name," he said. The clip was online by noon. By 3 o'clock, it had spread across local news pages with headlines that twisted everything into something sharper. "Disgraced engineer confronted after heroic rescue. Man who saved millionaire's daughter has dark past." Marcus Reed, hero or hypocrite? People who had never met him commented beneath the videos as if his life were a courtroom and their cruelty was evidence. Some called him brave. Others called him dangerous. A few said a man like him should never have been allowed near a private school. By the time Marcus picked up Amara, he knew from the way the other parents looked at him that the story had reached them too. Whispers moved across the sidewalk. A woman who usually smiled at Amara pulled her son closer. A man in a suit stared at Marcus's work clothes. then looked away like poverty was contagious. Marcus kept his hand on Amara's backpack and walked straight home. But children hear what adults think they are hiding. That evening, Amara was quiet through dinner. She pushed rice around her plate without eating. Marcus noticed, because he noticed everything about her. "You feeling okay, baby?" She kept her eyes down. "A girl at school said her mom saw you on the news." Marcus set his fork down. "She said you hurt people a long time ago." Amara's voice trembled. "She said her mom said you got somebody killed." The room tilted. Marcus could handle strangers. He could handle reporters. He could handle men in suits who buried truth under legal language. But seeing shame reach for his daughter made something inside him break in a place he thought had already been destroyed. He moved around the table and knelt beside her chair. "Amara, look at me." She looked up with wet eyes. "Did you?" "No," he said, and the word came out with a certainty he had never allowed himself to speak in public. "No, baby, I did not." "Then why are people saying it?" Marcus swallowed. "How do you explain corruption to a 6-year-old? How do you tell a child that sometimes the world punishes the innocent because the guilty can afford better lawyers? How do you tell her that her mother died because powerful people chose profit over safety, and then chose a grieving husband to carry the blame? Sometimes," he said slowly, "people repeat stories they don't understand." "Was it about Mommy?" Marcus closed his eyes. Amara had asked about her mother before, but always gently, as children do when they sense a wound beneath a name. Marcus had told her Naomi was kind, that she loved music, that she laughed loudly, that she wanted Amara more than anything in the world. But he had never told her how Naomi died. He had never told her about twisted steel, flashing sirens, dust in the air, and his own voice screaming her name until his throat bled. He stood without answering and walked to the bedroom. For the first time in years, he pulled the old wooden box from beneath the dresser and placed it on the kitchen table. Amara watched silently as he unlocked it. The hinges creaked like something waking up. Inside, the past waited exactly where he had left it. He took out Naomi's wedding ring first. It was gold, simple, still shining after all these years. Then came a photograph of her standing beside Marcus at a construction site, both of them wearing hard hats, her smile bright enough to make the unfinished building behind her look beautiful. Then he removed the folded blueprints and a small black voice recorder with a cracked screen. Amara touched the photograph with one finger. She was pretty. Marcus smiled through the pain. She was more than pretty. She was the best person I ever knew. "Did she die at the building?" Marcus nodded. "Did people blame you?" He nodded again. "But you didn't do it." "No," he whispered. "I tried to stop it." If this story has pulled you in, like this video, subscribe to the channel, and comment your city below. I want to know where you're watching from. Across the city, Victoria sat in a private conference room on the top floor of Sinclair Capital, watching the same news clip on a muted screen. Marcus's face appeared under a headline that made her stomach turn. Her staff had been instructed not to mention the rescue unless it benefited the company's image. But the media had found the old case faster than she expected. Or perhaps, she thought, someone had pointed them toward it. Richard Vale entered without knocking. He was in his early 60s, silver-haired, perfectly dressed, and calm in the way dangerous men often were. He had been her father's closest friend, her mentor after Charles Sinclair died, and the man who helped keep the company stable through every scandal. Victoria had known him since childhood. He used to bring her birthday gifts and tell her she had her father's eyes. Now he looked at the screen and sighed. "Unfortunate," he said. Victoria did not look away from the video. The reporter knew exactly what to ask. That is what reporters do. She brought up Naomi Reed. Richard adjusted his cufflink. Public records are public records. Victoria turned to him. "Did we leak it?" He smiled faintly. "Victoria, there is no we in a leak." That was not an answer. She studied him more carefully than she ever had before. For years, Richard had been part of the furniture of her life, always present, always polished, always offering advice that sounded like protection. But now every memory of him stood beside the photograph from the archive, the one where he and her father were speaking behind police tape while Marcus Reed stood alone in the background. "I want every internal file on Sinclair Tower," she said. Richard's smile faded just enough to reveal the man beneath it. "Why?" "Because a man connected to that case just saved my daughter's life, and now he is being publicly destroyed again. He was destroyed by his own choices." "Was he?" Richard stared at her. The room felt colder. "Your father handled that matter," he said. "It was painful, expensive, and settled long ago. Digging through old ashes will not bring anyone back." "No," Victoria replied, "but it might tell me who started the fire." For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Richard stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Be careful, Victoria. Your compassion is admirable, but guilt can make powerful people foolish. Marcus Reed is not your responsibility. My daughter is alive because of him. And your company is alive because your father knew when to bury problems." The words hung between them. Victoria felt something inside her go still. "What did you just say?" Richard's expression changed instantly, smooth again, controlled again. "I said your father was a practical man." But Victoria had heard enough. That night, she bypassed her executive assistant and went directly to the basement records room herself. Sinclair Capital kept decades of archived documents behind biometric locks and fireproof doors. Most CEOs never visited the room. They had people for that. But Victoria no longer knew which people she could trust. She searched for Sinclair Tower under legal settlements, engineering compliance, vendor contracts, and internal safety reviews. At first, she found only sanitized documents. The official version. The version designed to be discovered. Then, behind a mislabeled storage file connected to a former supplier, she found a scanned memo dated 5 days before the collapse. The memo was from Marcus Reed. Victoria read it once. Then again. His words were clear, urgent, impossible to misunderstand. He had warned senior management that the steel supports delivered to the site did not match the approved safety specifications. He had refused to authorize installation until proper inspections were completed. At the bottom of the memo was a digital note from someone in procurement. "Delay unacceptable. Proceed as scheduled." Victoria's hands went cold. Below that was another attachment, an approval form with Marcus's signature. But the signature looked different from the one on his original memo. She printed both pages and placed them side by side beneath the harsh basement light. One signature was firm, angled, consistent. The other was clumsy, slightly uneven, like someone had copied the shape without understanding the hand behind it. Forged. Victoria stood there with the papers trembling slightly in her hands, and for the first time, the truth was no longer a suspicion. Marcus Reed had told the truth, and her family had buried him for it. Victoria did not leave the records room until after midnight. By then, the cleaning staff had finished their rounds, the executive floor lights had dimmed, and the city outside the glass tower had turned into a field of distant headlights and glowing windows. But Victoria barely noticed any of it. She sat alone at a conference table with copies of old memos, supplier invoices, inspection reports, and settlement summaries spread in front of her like pieces of a life that had been shattered on purpose. The more she read, the clearer the pattern became. Marcus had not been careless. He had not been silent. He had warned them again and again. 3 separate times before the collapse, Marcus Reed had flagged the materials as unsafe. 3 separate times, his warnings had been redirected, delayed, or buried beneath corporate language. One email said the issue would be reviewed after schedule stabilization. Another said budget exposure must be considered before halting progress. A third, written by someone whose name had been removed from the archive, said, "Reed is becoming difficult. Find a solution before investors arrive." Victoria stared at that line for a long time. Find a solution. That was how men like Richard Vail spoke when they wanted cruelty to sound professional. By 1 a.m, Victoria had found the supplier change order. Sinclair Tower had originally been contracted to use reinforced steel from a certified manufacturer. But 6 weeks before the collapse, the order had been changed to a cheaper supplier through a shell company Victoria had never heard of. The price difference was enormous. Millions had been saved. Millions that would have looked good on quarterly reports. Millions that could impress investors, protect bonuses, and make a failing project appear successful. At the bottom of the approval chain were two names: Charles Sinclair, Richard Vail. Victoria pressed her fingers against her mouth. Her father's name hurt to see, but Richard's name made the hurt sharpen into anger. Charles Sinclair had been complicated, proud, controlling, and obsessed with legacy. Victoria knew that. But Richard had been the one who stayed. Richard had guided the company after her father's death. Richard had sat across from her in boardrooms and told her integrity was their greatest asset. Richard had hugged Lily at birthday parties and called her the future of the Sinclair name. And all these years he had known. Not only known, benefited. Victoria gathered the documents into a folder and locked them inside her private safe before leaving the office. As her car moved through the quiet streets, she looked at the city differently. Buildings rose around her, elegant and bright, each one carrying names of powerful people carved in stone and steel. She wondered how many of those names had been built on someone else's silence. She wondered how many men like Marcus had been blamed because they lacked the money to fight back. The next morning, Marcus found an envelope taped to his apartment door. There was no name on it. He stood in the hallway for a moment, listening. The building was quiet except for a television playing behind a neighbor's door. Amara was inside brushing her teeth, humming a song to herself. Marcus carefully pulled the envelope free and opened it. Inside was a single photograph. Naomi, not the photograph Marcus kept in his wooden box. This one was different. It showed Naomi standing near the Sinclair Tower site entrance on the day of the collapse, smiling while holding a small paper bag. Marcus remembered that bag. She had brought him dinner because he had been working late. He remembered teasing her for walking onto a dusty construction site in yellow shoes. He remembered her laughing and saying their baby wanted fries. He remembered the exact shape of the clouds above the half-built tower, the smell of concrete, the sharp wind, and the final normal moment before the world broke open. On the back of the photograph, someone had written in black marker, "Let the dead stay buried." Marcus's hands began to shake. He looked toward the bathroom, where Amara was still humming. Then he folded the photograph and shoved it into his jacket pocket, as if hiding it quickly could erase what it meant. But his body knew. The past was not only returning, it was threatening him. At school drop-off, Marcus kept Amara closer than usual. He scanned every parked car, every stranger standing too long, every face that turned away too quickly. Amara noticed. "Daddy, you're squeezing my hand." He loosened his grip immediately. "Sorry, baby. Are you scared?" Marcus looked down at her. The honest answer was yes. But fathers like Marcus learned to shape truth into something their children could survive. "I'm careful. That means scared sometimes." He almost smiled. "Sometimes." She stopped walking and wrapped her arms around him right there on the sidewalk. "I don't want people to be mean to you anymore." Marcus crouched in front of her and adjusted the strap of her backpack. "Listen to me. No matter what anybody says, you keep your head up. Your name is Reed. That means you don't bend just because the wind gets loud." Amara nodded seriously. Like a tree. Like a tree with deep roots." After she went inside, Marcus stood outside the school longer than usual. Then he pulled Victoria's business card from his wallet. He had carried it without admitting to himself that he was carrying it. His thumb moved over the raised letters of her name. He did not want to call her. Everything in him resisted it. But the photograph in his pocket had crossed a line. It had reached for Naomi. It had reached for Amara. And Marcus had learned long ago that silence does not protect a child forever. Sometimes silence only teaches the guilty where to stand. Victoria answered on the second ring. For a moment, Marcus said nothing. Then he spoke in a low voice. "Someone left a picture of my wife on my door." Victoria went still. "Where are you?" "Why?" "Because if someone is threatening you, we need to." "No," Marcus cut in. "There is no we. There is if the threat came because I started digging." Marcus closed his eyes. He hated that she was right. "Meet me somewhere public. No lawyers. No assistants. Just you." An hour later, they sat across from each other in the back corner of a small diner on East Fulton. Marcus had chosen the place because he knew the owner and because the windows faced the street. Victoria arrived without security, though Marcus doubted she was truly unprotected. People like her always had invisible walls around them. He placed the photograph on the table. Victoria looked at Naomi's face and her expression changed. Not into pity. Marcus could not have tolerated pity. It changed into shame. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. Marcus leaned back. "I didn't come for sorry. I found documents." His eyes sharpened. Victoria opened a folder and slid copies across the table. "Your memo. The supplier change order. The approval form with your forged signature. I also found evidence that the materials were changed to cut costs." Marcus stared at the papers without touching them. For years he had replayed the truth in his head, so many times it had begun to feel like a story he was telling himself to stay alive. Now it sat in front of him in black ink. His breath caught. Victoria noticed, but said nothing. Finally, Marcus reached for the memo. His fingers moved over his own name, his own warning, his own words that nobody had listened to. His eyes darkened with grief, so old it had become part of his face. "I begged them," he said. "I told them those supports were wrong. I told them if they installed them, people could die. Richard told me I was young, emotional, replaceable. Your father told me delays cost money. I said I wouldn't sign. 2 days later, my signature was on the approval." Victoria's voice was barely above a whisper. "Why didn't you fight?" Marcus looked at her then, and the pain in his eyes made her regret the question before he answered. "I did." He reached into his jacket and pulled out the cracked voice recorder from the wooden box. He set it between them like a piece of evidence from another lifetime. "I recorded a meeting with Richard the night before the collapse. I thought if I had proof, someone would listen. But after Naomi died, everything changed. I was grieving. I was angry. I was alone. Then Richard came to me at the hospital while my wife's body was still in the morgue." Victoria's face tightened. Marcus continued, each word controlled but heavy. "He told me the company had documents showing I approved the materials. He told me if I fought them, they would make sure I was charged, sued, and destroyed. Then he said the state could question whether a man facing criminal negligence was fit to raise a newborn child alone." Victoria's eyes filled with horror. "He threatened to take Amara. She wasn't even born yet," Marcus said. "Naomi was 8 months pregnant. They delivered Amara early after the collapse. She came into this world without her mother, and Richard stood in that hospital hallway telling me I could lose her too." For a while, the diner noise faded around them. Victoria looked at the recorder. "What's on it?" Marcus's jaw tightened. "Enough." "Then why keep it hidden?" "Because evidence doesn't protect you when the people you're accusing own judges, newspapers, and police commissioners. Back then, I had a premature baby in an incubator and a dead wife. I chose my daughter." Victoria nodded slowly. She finally understood that Marcus had not disappeared because he was weak. He had disappeared because fatherhood had forced him to measure justice against survival. "Let me use it," she said. Marcus pulled the recorder back. "No, Marcus. No. You don't get to walk in here after 12 years and decide you're the hero of my story." Victoria accepted that because it was true. "I'm not trying to be," she said. "I'm trying to stop the man who did this before he does worse." Marcus looked out the window. Across the street, a black sedan sat parked near the curb. Its windows were tinted too dark to see inside. He had noticed it when he arrived. Now it was still there. Victoria followed his gaze. The sedan started its engine and pulled away. Marcus stood immediately. "I need to get Amara." Victoria rose too. "I can help." He looked at her, torn between instinct and necessity. "If your help brings danger closer to my daughter, I will disappear again." "I know," Victoria said. "But if you disappear, Richard wins again." Marcus looked down at Naomi's photograph on the table. The dead had stayed buried long enough. And for the first time in 12 years, the truth had a witness with power. He picked up the recorder and placed it in Victoria's folder. "One copy," he said. You make one copy, and then you give it back. Victoria nodded. You have my word. Marcus's expression remained guarded. Your word is not worth much to me yet. No, she said softly. But maybe the truth can be. Victoria listened to the recording 3 times in her private office, and each time, the truth became harder to deny. Marcus's younger voice was on it, tense but steady, telling Richard Vail that the steel supports were not approved, that the site needed to be shut down, that he would not let workers walk beneath a structure he believed was unsafe. Then Richard's voice answered, smooth and cold, saying delays would destroy investor confidence. Marcus said people could die. Richard said people lost jobs every day because emotional men could not understand business. Marcus said he would report the violation. Then came the sentence that made Victoria's blood turn cold. Then we will find someone willing to sign what you won't. There was a long silence on the recording after that, followed by Marcus saying, if my name appears on that approval, I'll know who forged it. Richard laughed softly. Marcus, by the time anyone cares, the building will already be standing. Victoria removed the headphones and sat motionless. For the first time in her life, the Sinclair name did not feel like a legacy. It felt like a weight pressing against her chest. Her father had not simply made a mistake. He had allowed a lie to survive because exposing it would have cost money, reputation, and power. Richard had done worse. He had created the danger, buried the warning, threatened a grieving husband, and let a child grow up with the world believing her father was responsible for her mother's death. Victoria copied the recording onto one encrypted drive, then locked the original in her safe exactly as Marcus had asked. But before she could decide her next move, her office door opened. Richard Vail walked in. He did not knock. He did not smile. Behind him stood 2 members of the company's legal team, both avoiding Victoria's eyes. I hear you've been accessing restricted archives, Richard said. Victoria slowly closed her laptop. It's my company. Richard stepped closer. It is your company because your father trusted me to help preserve it, not because he expected you to burn it down over an old tragedy. Victoria looked at the lawyers. Leave us. Neither moved. Richard smiled faintly. They stay. That was when Victoria understood. Richard was no longer advising her. He was cornering her. He placed a folder on her desk. Inside were documents prepared for an emergency board meeting. The language was polished, but the meaning was clear. If Victoria continued investigating Sinclair Tower, the board could question her judgment, remove her authority temporarily, and claim she was emotionally compromised because of Lily's rescue. You would remove me from my own company, she asked. I would protect the company from you, Richard replied. Victoria stood. You forged Marcus Reed's signature. Richard's face did not change. Careful. You changed the supplier. I saved a failing project. You killed Naomi Reed. For the first time, his calm cracked. His eyes hardened, and the old mask slipped just enough for Victoria to see the man Marcus had faced 12 years ago. Naomi Reed walked onto a construction site where she did not belong, Richard said. Do not put that on me. Victoria felt rage move through her so fiercely she had to grip the edge of the desk. She was bringing dinner to her husband. She became unfortunate collateral in a business crisis. The words were so cruel, so empty of humanity, that Victoria knew no private settlement, no quiet resignation, no internal discipline would ever be enough. Richard had not carried guilt for 12 years. He had carried irritation that the dead still had names. But Richard was not finished. If you release anything, he said, Sinclair Capital collapses. Investors leave. Lawsuits reopen. Your father's reputation dies with yours. Lily grows up known as the granddaughter of a criminal. And Marcus Reed. He leaned closer. I will make sure every headline says he fabricated evidence for money. People already believe he is guilty. It won't be hard to remind them. Victoria stared at him. And for the first time, she was not afraid of losing power. She was afraid of what power had made her willing to ignore for so long. Get out, she said. Richard smiled again. Board meeting at 9 tomorrow. Sleep well. But Victoria did not sleep. She called Dana, her assistant, and then she called an independent attorney outside Sinclair Capital. After that, she called a journalist known for exposing corporate corruption, not the kind who chased grieving men outside garages, but the kind who read documents line by line and did not scare easily. Finally, just before dawn, she called Marcus. He answered with one word, Amara. She's safe, Victoria said quickly. This is about tomorrow. I'm going public. Silence. Then Marcus said, Do you understand what that means? Yes. No, you don't. Men like Richard don't just lose. They drag everyone down with them. Victoria looked through the window at the city her family had helped shape and stain. Then I'll make sure he doesn't drag you alone. The press conference was announced at noon. By then, rumors had already spread. Cameras filled the lobby of Sinclair Capital. Reporters crowded behind velvet ropes. Board members stood pale and furious near the back wall. Richard arrived in a dark suit, calm as ever, clearly expecting Victoria to make a controlled statement about misinformation and family privacy. Instead, Victoria walked to the podium with Marcus Reed beside her. The room erupted. Questions flew from every direction. Marcus kept his eyes forward, his expression guarded, but Victoria could see the tension in his hands. He had walked into the center of the storm he had spent 12 years avoiding. Not for revenge. For Naomi. For Amara. For the truth. Victoria raised her hand, and slowly the room quieted. 12 years ago, she began, Sinclair Tower collapsed during construction. The official investigation blamed a young engineer named Marcus Reed. Today, I am here to say publicly that the official story was false. The room went silent. Victoria continued, her voice steady. She displayed Marcus's warning memo. She showed the forged approval form. She revealed the supplier change order signed by Richard and approved by her father. She played the recording. Richard's voice filled the lobby, saying they would find someone willing to sign what Marcus would not. By the time the audio ended, no one was speaking. Victoria turned toward Marcus. This man was not the cause of that tragedy. He was the first person who tried to prevent it. My family's company ignored him, framed him, and allowed him to carry blame that never belonged to him. Marcus looked down, his jaw tight. Victoria's voice broke slightly, but she did not hide it. Marcus, on behalf of the Sinclair family, I am sorry. For your wife. For your daughter. For every year we stole from your name. For a moment, Marcus said nothing. Then he stepped to the microphone. I didn't come here because an apology can bring my wife back, he said. It can't. I didn't come because clearing my name erases what my daughter heard at school. It doesn't. I came because truth should not depend on how much money a man has. Naomi deserved better. The workers deserved better. My daughter deserves to know her father did not stay silent because he was guilty. He stayed silent because he was trying to keep her safe. The first question came softly from a reporter in the front row. Mr. Reed, what do you want now? Marcus looked at Victoria, then at the cameras. I want the families paid what they were owed. I want every unsafe project reviewed. I want Richard Vale held accountable. And then I want to take my daughter home. Within hours, Richard was removed from the company. By evening, authorities opened a criminal investigation. The next morning, his arrest was broadcast across every major news channel in the city. Reporters who had once called Marcus disgraced now called him vindicated. Some apologized. Most simply changed their headlines and pretended they had always been searching for truth. But Marcus did not watch much of it. He was at home with Amara, sitting at the kitchen table while she colored another picture for the fridge. This time, she did not draw him with a cape. She drew him standing beside a woman with wings. Is that your mom? Marcus asked softly. Amara nodded. She was there too, just invisible. Marcus looked away, blinking hard. A week later, Victoria visited Naomi's grave with Marcus and Amara. Lily came too, holding a small bouquet of white flowers. The two girls stood together quietly while the adults remained a few steps behind. Victoria had changed since the press conference. Not completely, not magically. People do not become new overnight. But she had begun leaving work earlier. She picked Lily up from school herself. She listened more. And when Lily asked if Mr. Marcus was a hero, Victoria answered, yes. But not because he saved you from a car. Because he survived the truth and still chose kindness. Marcus stood before Naomi's headstone, one hand resting on Amara's shoulder. For years, he had visited that grave carrying shame the world had placed on him. Now the shame was gone, but grief remained. He was surprised to learn that clearing his name did not make him miss Naomi less. It only let him love her memory, without defending himself to ghosts. Amara leaned against him. "Daddy." "Yeah, baby." Did the truth find its way back? Marcus smiled through tears and looked at Naomi's name carved in stone. "Yeah," he whispered. "It finally did." And as the sun lowered behind the trees, Marcus walked away with his daughter's hand in his. No longer a man running from a past someone else had written for him. Behind them, Victoria held Lily close, understanding at last that wealth could build walls, but only truth could open doors. Sometimes the world calls a man broken because it never stayed long enough to see what he survived. But Marcus Reed had survived loss, lies, and silence. And in the end, the truth did not just save his name. It gave his daughter back the father the world had tried to steal. If this story touched your heart, like this video, subscribe to the channel, and comment your city below. Where are you watching from today?